Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today I am going to speak on the module Agriculture and Peasantry from the paper Ecological Anthropology, Cultural and Biological Dimensions. The learning objective of this module include the origin of early forms of agriculture, the concept of intensive agriculture and its salient feature, techniques employed by the intensive agriculture, changes in the scale caused by the intensive agriculture, and the detrimental effect of the new technology on the environment. According to Julian Stewart, in 1955, technology was the window between natural and the human society and culture. Human beings are unlike other animals due to the presence of culture. The ordinary theories of biology and ecology cannot be employed without taking culture into account. Culture is a huge mass of socially acquired knowledge, concept and preferences. Many things like language, dress, religion, political opinion, customs, etc. are learned. Among all these parts of the culture, technology is, according to Stewart, the way that human makes a living in a world that links them directly to the rest of the nature. Stewart was a pioneer in the cultural ecology, which is a branch of human ecology that studies the way in which the culture is used by people to adapt to their environment. He argued that the cultural aspect was associated with technology, which sets human and their culture above and separate from the rest of the environment. Stewart's main ideas are summarized in the concept of the culture core. The culture core consists of those features of the culture that are illuminated in the technological window and are related to the work of making a living in the particular environment. Stewart developed his culture core concept to explain the effect of environmental variations on human culture and the range of variation within subsistence types as well as the differences between subsistence types. Figure 1 is showing the types of societies. 5 types of societies were identified based on their basic subsistence technology or mode of production. Number 1, foragers, that is food gatherers. Number 2, hire hunters. Number 3, herdsmen and pastoralists. Number 4, simple cultivators or horticulturists. And number 5 is advanced cultivators or intensive agriculture. This module deals with the intensive agriculture and the technological advancement, socio-political and environmental changes accompanying it. Now let us understand basically the origin of agriculture first. The origin of agriculture is viewed as a long-term process of immense social, economic and historical significance. It transformed the operation of human communities within a last 10,000 years. These changes included a rise in the population density, higher survival rate of the humans, settlement and possession of individual property and wealth, but also generation and greater spread of the disease and their pathological conditions related to physical labor and poor diet. A shortage of the food resources, primarily the lack of wild animals for hunters, could have led to the intended production of plants. Reasons for this include an increase in the human population density along with decrease in the big game species because of overhunting. In the earliest phase of the agriculture, the cultivated plants probably served as a kind of the food reserves or an alternative source in case of failure in hunting. Subsequently, crop production gained importance as the hunted animal became increasingly scarce or rare. Complete dependence of the humans on agriculture only emerged after wild animals and plants could no longer make the significant contribution to the food supply of the growing population. Agriculture is said to have appeared about 10,000 years ago. in a few relatively small regions of the world during a phase in the climate that was accompanied by important changes in the living condition of organisms, including humans. It involved the domestication of the plants and animals, which entails purposeful and selective breeding. From these, Neolithic agriculture expanded across the world in system of the pastoral animal breeding and shifting cultivation. In arid regions, hydraulic agrarian system based either on the annual flood or irrigation were formed at the end of the Neolithic epoch in Mesopotamia, in the Nile and Indus Valley, and in the bases and the valley of the Inca Empire. In the 18th and 19th centuries, shifting cultivation was replaced by the intensive agriculture. The three major forms of the agriculture can be placed, that is horticulture, pastoralism and intensive agriculture. The difference between the three are largely a matter of scale. The intensive agriculture is a large scale and complex system of farming and animal husbandry, often involving the use of animal labors, equipments, water diversion technique and the production of surplus food. Intensive agriculture represents a significant shift to the scale and scope of the agriculture and reflects an important modification in the relationship between people and the environment. The use of animals and machine to supplement human labor is noteworthy in intensive agriculture, although there are a few intensive systems that rely solely on the human labor. Intensive agriculture system also employ the component of the other subsistence strategies of hunting and gathering, horticulture and pastoralism, but these tend to be minor component of the system. A consequences of the increased development of the agrarian technology is increased crop production, leading to higher population densities and increase in the material wealth. Associated with this change is the substantial increase in the social and political complexity of the societies. Figure 2 depicts the gradual introduction of the agriculture. Now let us understand the techniques employed by the intensive agriculture. Intensive agriculture utilizes multiple techniques employing all of the primary methods used by all other groups, with intensive agriculture being much larger in scale. The major new techniques used in the intensive agriculture are the plough, cultivation and irrigation. Many irrigate very small scale plots such as the vegetable gardens. Well watered crops produces much greater yield than the unirrigated crops. Higher crop yield can support the more or bigger population, whose labor can help intensify the agriculture to support even more bigger population group, and a large number of people are a condition for the development of a complex society. Now let us see how irrigation helps. Irrigation generally involves the purposeful diversion of the water from the natural resources into the agricultural field to provide water and any nutrient it may contain. Irrigation can be small scale, such as the simple diversion of a small spring fed creek onto a patch of the grass, to a very large scale such as the construction of the hundreds of miles of canals. Around 40% of the food produced in the world comes from the 16% of the agricultural land that is irrigated. A number of different types of the irrigation systems are known. The first one is the flood irrigation, also called the natural or basic irrigation, which involves the use of the flood water to cover and soak the fields. While this method results in an irrigation of the field, it is not true irrigation method because no human constructions are used. Much of the irrigation of the Egyptian culture was flood irrigation. However, the Egyptian supplemented the natural flooding with the pot irrigation and with the construction of the basins to store the flood water. Genuine irrigation involves the construction of some facilities such as the dams, diversions, canals, wells or other methods to purposefully divert the water to field. Rivers and or streams might be diverted, channeled into the canals and delivered to the field many miles afar. Now let us see what is dry farming. Dry farming is the production of the crops relying on the water from the rainfall and no construction or no constructed irrigation system are being used. Farming irrigated lands may have been the most important approach in early states, but today about 84% of the world's agriculture land, including the pastures, is dry farmed. In many areas, rainfall is quite sufficient as a water source, and in some areas fields have to be systemized to drain excess water. In other regions such as the central United States and most parts of the India, crops are utterly dependent on the rain and a dry year can result in the crop failure, according to Sutton and Anderson. The use of other subsistence technologies are the hunting and gathering technique. All cultures do some hunting and gathering, but such activities are usually much less important in the intensive agricultural resources than in the horticulture or pastoral groups. Most intensive agriculturists use very small amount of the wild resources, but some such as ocean fish are now extracted on a vast scale using fishing fleets and industrial complexes. The economies of some countries such as of Japan, Iceland and the United States are highly dependent on the ocean fish. Now let us understand the horticulture technique in intensive agriculture. Small scale agriculture plots and gardens still form an aspect of the intensive agriculture, as can be seen by the numerous backyard gardens. The pastoral techniques are also being used. Most farmers raise some animals for food, usually the small species such as the dogs, pigs, chickens and guinea pigs. Intensive agriculturists tend to raise much larger animals such as the cows, and while these are generally used for food, they are also used for a number of other purposes. Most intensive agriculturists employ a component of the pastoralism. Now let us understand the changes in scale used by the intensive agriculture. The most dramatic differences between horticulture and intensive agriculture is that of the scale. Intensive agriculturists generally cultivate the larger quantities of the land, have larger populations and impact the environment to a much greater degree. The use of animal to supplement the human labor significantly increase the scale and intensity of the agriculture. The introduction of the agricultural machine based on the internal combustion engine changed the scale again, this time in a massive way, ushering on contemporary industrialized agriculture. Figure 3 displays the intensive agriculture. Now let us understand the agricultural land. The agricultural land consists of the three main types: arable land, including the cropland and fallows, land under the permanent crops, and pastures and the hay field. The total area of the agricultural land in the world is 4,973.4 million hectares. They cover 33.3% of the terrestrial surface, including 10.3% of arable land and land under permanent crops, and 23% of the pastures and the hay field. The largest area of the agricultural lands are found in Asia and in Africa. Agricultural activity is the main process altering the plant canopy on earth. As a result of the agricultural development, areas of steppes and savannas biomes have decreased by 7 to 10 times and the areas of the forest biomes by 1/3. Australia, USA, China, Brazil, India and Russia have the largest area of natural ecosystems replaced by the agricultural land. Now let us see the agricultural production. The increase in the agricultural input is accompanied by the rise in the agricultural output. Asia is the greatest producer of the agricultural product. It gives about more than 40 or between 40 to 45% of the global agricultural output. China and India are the main driving force of agricultural development in Asia. Only two regions can be compared to Asia, that is Europe, which gives 15 to 20% of the global agricultural output, and North America, which gives about 10 to 15% of the global output. Except for the roots and tubers, Sub-Saharan Africa produce 15% of the pulses and 25% of the roots and tubers. In the second half of the 20th century, world agricultural production has been growing steadily, but with the dissimilar rates in different regions. However, the huge production does not mean sufficient consumption because of different population and different food allowances. The individual level of the food consumptions does not coincide with the agricultural production in the particular region. Now let us understand how labor supplements it. In horticultural and the pastoral societies, humans provided the vast majority of the labor needed to produce the food, including the clearing of the land, constructing of the field and planting and harvesting the crop. However, as animals and machines begin to supplement human labor, the scale of the agriculture increased dramatically and the areas previously too difficult for the agriculturist could now be colonized by the farmers, who often displaced the other groups already in those ecosystems. Animals were incorporated into some agricultural systems early on and quickly became the integral part of those systems. Human labor still remained the important, but animals were able to do the work of the many people by carrying heavy loads and pulling plough through their heavy soil. While domesticated animals had been around for a long time, large animals were required to be useful for the agricultural labor, as animals such as the dogs are small to pull the plough. However, the large domesticated animals were not available in all the societies. The few present in the New World, such as the llamas in the Andes, were used as the pack animals, but not for the agricultural labor. Thus, the intensive agricultural system in the New World, such as in the Maya system, were all based on the human labor. Now let us see how technology has helped. Technological changes has been an important aspect of the development of intensive agricultural system. Technology has increased the efficiency with which the farmers can grow the crops and has opened new eco-zones to the agricultural use. A number of the simple technological changes had significant impact on the farming, including the use of the metal axe, which allowed the forest to be cleared much faster than with the stone axes. The defining traits of agrarian technology is the presence of plough and the draft animals. Plough were first used in the Middle East around 5000 years ago. The first plough were simple scratch ploughs whose physical effect on the soil was just to stir the top 10 to 15 centimeter of the soil to prepare a seed bed. In light dry soil, these ploughs are quite sufficient to aerate the soil, provides a barrier to the evaporation of the soil moisture and destroy the weeds. In semi-arid areas, the scratch ploughing is all that is required to maintain the permanent fields. The continued technological development in the agrarian societies can be illustrated by the evolution of the plough. The mold board plough was an important innovation in the West before industrialization. More dramatic change can be seen with development of the machine powered by the fossil fuel. Clearing a section of the forest that would have taken many men a year with the metal axe and horse-drawn wagon can now be done in a matter of days by a few men with the gasoline-powered machines or diesel-powered bulldozers. The machine changed the speed and efficiency of these activities, and in doing so also changed the scale of the environmental manipulations. Now let us understand how demographic changes have affected. The main demographic consequences of agrarian technology were simply a trend towards the higher population density and larger settlement. It also permitted urbanization of the population to a greater extent than was possible under the horticulture. This was because more productive farmers meant more people could pursue the urban specialty occupations. Also, land and the maritime transportation improvement made it possible to supply the produce to the cities with the larger population, thus giving rise to the large urban population pursuing the various occupations, thus having an impact on the culture of agrarian society. Populations also fluctuated substantially every now and then due to the famine, disease, epidemics and political breakdown. On the other hand, during the period of population rise, population densities often seem to have exceeded the level at which that everyone could be productively employed at current level of technology. Now let us see the social organization role. As carrying capacity and the population increased, social organization became more complex. As occupational specialization increases, new organizational principles were developed, such as the market for the exchange of the specialist product. A part of this increase in social complexity is the development of the large-scale political and religious institutions. The sexual division of labor remains fundamental to agrarian societies. Men's labor became relatively more important, mainly because managing large animals like hunting is almost always men's work. Thus, economic importance of the male is perhaps reflected in the lower status for the women. This is because in excluding the women from the agricultural work, their labor became devalued. In addition, agrarian societies generally have a strong patrilineal bias to the inheritance and hence the ownership of the property. These changed condition in labor and ownership are reflected in the marriage customs. Men in the agrarian societies have to be compensated for taking on the responsibility of a wife. Thus, dowry is more frequent. Now let us see their political institutions. Human societies, which started off as the bands and altered into the chiefdoms as productivity increased, eventually evolved into the states. A state is a society with elaborate social stratification and a hierarchical and complex political system that was highly centralized and internally specialized. Many earliest researchers like Childe, Stewart used the term civilization and included a number of other criteria, including the urban centers, writing, monumental architectures, craft specializations, bureaucrats, codified law, and a central authority with the ability to use the force following the law. Now, let us identify some detrimental effect of the new technology. The vast majority of the labor in this system is provided by machines powered by the fossil fuels, and new machines to replace the human workers continued to be introduced. Fields are very intensively used and their fertility is usually maintained through the use of chemical fertilizers. Fertilizers are necessary for restoring the soil fertility. Organic fertilizers have been actively used throughout the history of agriculture. The application of the mineral fertilizers began at the end of the 19th century. In 2005, their consumptions reached 157 million tons annually. Disease and the pest are controlled by the chemical pesticides. Chemical fertilizers, herbicides and pesticides pollute the water supply and unintentionally kill many other plants and animals. The system also results in a large scale alteration of the habitat and in the loss of the biodiversity. Without machines and equipments, the modern intensive agriculture is impossible because it involves many manipulations with the agricultural land, cattle, etc. The use of the tractors result in the soil compaction on cropland and additional carbon dioxide emission because of the utilization of the fossil fuel. Large scale storage facilities and refrigeration allows crops to be stored for years and so mitigate the fluctuation in the productivity due to the drought or the other condition. A complex transportation and trade system allows these crops to be moved around the world with the little difficulty. While this system is highly productive, is also very polluting and inefficient. Further, the system is ultimately unsustainable according to the Sutton and Anderson. Now, let us understand the contemporary use of traditional system. Given the propensity of the contemporary agriculture to destroy land and pollute the water, many people are searching for the alternative method of food production. It is slowly being realized that some traditional techniques of agriculture can be highly productive and valuable or even necessary. The traditional Chinese wet rice system is exceedingly efficient and productive, utilizing the virtually all of the available resources within an area, but is being replaced by the industrialized agriculture. This will result in a short term increase in the production, but will ultimately make the land less productive. Fairhead and Leach in 1996 showed that West African agriculture was not only far more sophisticated than had been assumed, but that it has actually created many of the groves that outsiders were trying to protect from the underdeveloped farming. Similar examples might be provided worldwide. Now, let us summarize the module. So far we have understood that intensive agriculture is a large scale farming, often involving the use of the animal labor, equipments, water, diversion techniques and the production of surplus food. Intensive agriculture represents a fundamental shift upward in the intensity of land use, increase in the population, growth in the complexity of socio-political system and increase in the human impact on the environment. The change in the agricultural intensity resulted in the growth of population and increasing complexity in social and political organization and eventually the development of state-level societies. Intensive agriculture employs all of the techniques of horticulture and pastoralism, plus supplemented labor and irrigation, all combined into a complex and interrelated system. Such systems are quite flexible and resilient and can support billions of people. After World War II, Western agriculture became increasingly industrialized and mechanized, with machines powered by fossil fuel providing much of the labor and manufactured chemical much of the fertilizer. This type of agriculture is highly productive and has rapidly expanded to replace the many traditional systems and to take over the eco-zones previously unoccupied by the farmers. Intensive agriculture has had a significant impact on the environment, much more than the horticulture or pastoralism alone. Ecosystems became simplified, landforms significantly altered, and food economies became more narrow. Ultimately, the issue of the pollution, dependency on the food fuels, and population growth will make contemporary industrialized agriculture unsustainable in the long term. However, with the application of the traditional system of farming with the modern agriculture, societies all over the world have the opportunity to make their agriculture systems more sustainable for the future generations. Thank you.